There's a few core concepts in personality psychology that I think are really useful and really important to talk about because they have implications with how we use personality to understand ourselves and our lives, but particularly in the workplace. So once you understand these things about personality, everything else about how you use personality testing, especially in the workplace and understanding work, is really, really helpful. So a few of these concepts are: one, personality is stable over time. So a good, robust, well-researched measure of personality is consistent and stable over time in adulthood anyway. Personality is a bit more variable, changeable in childhood and adolescence as the brain's still developing and growing, but in adulthood, personality is fairly stable. It's not 100% stable. Things can change a little bit. Life impact can happen. Things can be a bit different. Personality does tend to mature and evolve slightly over time, but it's very stable. So the implications of that for work is if personality is stable, if it's consistent, we can use that to predict things over time. If we know someone's personality is going to be fairly similar in 10, 20, or 30 years, we know their performance that comes from the way they express that personality trait is also going to be similar. So that has really useful implications for the workplace when we're looking at development pipelines, when we're looking at long-term planning for who's going to be in what role at what time, at what point in their career span. Really interesting, really important, really useful implications of personality traits being stable over a long period of time. So for that, we need to make sure we're measuring personality in a way that is stable and consistent and predictable over time. The other thing is personality is measuring thinking, feeling, and acting. So that's affect, cognition, and behavior, to use the psychological terms. But those are the three areas of psychology that personality is tapping into. And we're looking at those consistent, long-term, stable patterns in thinking, acting, and feeling. And so we know that those are consistent and stable. We know that they don't change that much over time. And then we can measure those specific areas when we're looking at personality tests. So that's two things that help us to understand people and personality at work and how we can use that effectively to boost performance and well-being and other things we want to boost at work. The other thing about personality is it's separable. So I kind of made reference to that before, but personality is separable into specific traits. Personality is a big concept, but it's not just one thing. It's divisible. We can divide personality into this trait, this trait, this trait, X, Y, Z, whatever they are. Things like conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, or adjustment. So then we can divide these long-term stable traits into things that we can use to measure and then predict specific types of performance. So we can break down personality to say this trait predicts this type of performance. This type predicts this type of performance, or this behavior, or, these are the behaviors, the thoughts, the emotions that come along with this level of this personality trait. So that's another tool we can use to say, okay, we've got these personality traits, we know they're stable over time, and we know they predict behavior. So that's really useful for the workplace. Then once we've got those other core components of personality, we know that personality should have outcomes. We should have predictable outcomes that we should measure. So when you're validating using testing any sort of personality test, we know that it should be related to actual predictions, right? And then that's where all of the research and the importance of the science comes in, is you need to test outcomes and figure out whether these personality traits predict those outcomes. Because you can have traits that are stable, they're consistent, they're separable into different traits, but if they don't predict anything, they're not that useful in the workplace. So that's where having a really good test that predicts specific outcomes is really important in the workplace. And we know there's workplace personality tests that are better than others. So anything that uses the 5-factor model of personality, the OCEAN model, that's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, is a very well-validated and well-researched tool or model of personality. And then there's other ways you can use that research or that background to develop really specific tests of personality in context or for specific purposes, like in the workplace. But there's other personality tests that are not very good models. They're not very well validated. So an example of that is Myers-Briggs. There's not a lot of academic or scientific research on Myers-Briggs, and the stuff that has been done shows that it's not very predictive of outcomes. So it's not a very useful test to use in predicting people's potential or performance in the workplace, because the science would suggest that there's not a lot of evidence to say it has predictive validity. That is, it's useful in predicting outcomes. Whereas things like the Big Five model of personality are very good in predicting predicting outcomes. And then the more you can narrow in on those specific models that have been found through research to be useful at predicting outcomes, the more you can hone in on those specific outcomes and knowing what you want to predict and how. So if you understand these core components of personality psychology, then there's all sorts of ways you can use them to make either yourself or other people more effective at work and managing workplace processes, management, leadership, human resources, all sorts of processes at work that can help make people more productive, more effective, and using that knowledge and understanding of personality to improve people's performance and behavior and well-being, hopefully.